right, folks, we are live. So, over the past few weeks, Vice President and presidential candidate Kamala Harris has outlined a number of economic policy proposals her potential administration would enact. Some of these policies include price controls, subsidies for first-time homebuyers, increases to the corporate income tax, increases to the capital gains tax. How are these economic policies going to affect the economy, and what do these policies reveal about the Democratic presidential candidate? We're going to be talking about all this and more in episode 462 of the In the Tank podcast.
What's wrong with you young people? You think you just fell out of a coconut tree?
Welcome to the In the Tank podcast. As always, I'm your host, Donald Kendal, and joining me today, I've got a couple people. I've got Jim Lakely, VP of the Heartland Institute. How are you doing today, good sir?
I'm doing great. I am officially actually on vacation, personal time off, PTO, but I love this show and I love our audience, and I have some likeness for you, Donnie. So I thought I would take some time out of my vacation to join the show. So I have not done my usual show prep, which probably means I'll be on a hair trigger in anger. So that's to look forward to.
Oh, fantastic. I did plenty of show prep this time. Also joining us, fresh out of the coconut tree, Chris Talgo, editorial director here at the Heartland Institute. How are you doing today, good sir?
I'm hanging in.
Just
That's what I'm doing. Just hanging in.
Yeah. Chris, over the weekend, he wasn't going to gloat about this, but I'll do it for him. Came within an inch of getting his first hole-in-one at the golf course.
Second hole-in-one.
Second hole-in-one. Okay, well, there you go. Within an inch. So send all your praise in the private chat to Chris Talgo. Gentlemen, we got a plenty to talk about. I want to dedicate, sometimes we do like kind of more political angles, over the past couple of months, there's been a lot of political stuff going down. And, I've always said that like, I care less about politics and more about policy. This is going to be a policy heavy episode because like I said in the intro, there's been a lot of economic policy proposals out of Kamala Harris over the past couple of weeks. And I wanted to spend the lion's share of this episode breaking those things down. But we have a lot to talk about. There's a number of those policies out there. But before we do, I have to put that message out there that I put at the beginning of all of these episodes. That's asking, those audio-only listeners that are probably catching the show on a Friday or later, leave a review for us on iTunes. That would be greatly appreciated. And consider joining us a day earlier, Thursdays at noon Central Time, where we are live streaming this on Facebook and YouTube and Rumble and X and all of those things. You can join the conversation, throw your comments and questions in the chat. Maybe we'll address your questions on the fly. Maybe we'll show your comments on the screen, all of that good stuff. You can support the show by not super chatting on YouTube because they demonetized us. So if you'd like, you could support the show by going to heartland.org/inthetank and donating directly to the show. And that way the donations come straight to this show and they don't get taxed by YouTube at a 30% clip there. And you can also help the show out by hitting that like button, sharing this content, subscribing if you haven't already, or just leaving a comment under the video. All those things help break through those big tech algorithms that prevent content like this from being shown to more people. But before we get into all of the policy proposals that I'm promising you, we got to talk about what's going on at the DNC. So I have not been, I'll admit, I have not been paying much attention to the Democratic National Convention. I can only take so much propaganda. Chris, you are more well-equipped to withstand the onslaught of propaganda than I am, being our resident listener of CNN and MSNBC and all of that. So my knowledge of what's going on at the DNC mostly just comes from stuff that either you've talked to me about or things that people shared with me or some posts that I've seen on Twitter. But How's it going over there? I think today, Thursday, is the last day, right? This is the time for Kamala to do her big speech and all of that.
Well, today's going to be the grand finale, and we can expect a glorious speech from Kamala Harris about how the economy is in great shape and how we all are more prosperous and more wealthy than we've ever been, but we just don't know that. So I'm looking forward to that. But Donnie, as I told you yesterday, the highlight for me so far has been Lil Jon's performance. I think he did a great job, really, revving up the crowd. During the roll call vote, he was a participant in Georgia's roll call vote, so that was pretty entertaining. Kind of took me back to the early 2000s. Back in college. So man, that was just a very nice little nostalgic journey I went on. Other than that, it's just been total lie. It's really been about the main theme has been abortion. They're also giving away free abortions and free vasectomies. So that's great. We got that going for them. And it's just been about making fun of Donald Trump, ad hominem attacks, nothing of substance, of course, because they can't. And that's pretty much how it's been so far. So, yeah, I mean, you haven't really missed much, unless you're a big fan of Lil Jon like myself. So,
well, both conventions had throwbacks to the early 2000s then, with Kid Rock being at the RNC. So that's good. The political parties have their finger right on the pulse there. So, yeah. Okay. So you mentioned the abortion thing. Okay. I wasn't even sure that was real. Okay. Like I had heard, like I said, my news of the DNC just comes from random stuff that I see on Twitter or stuff that people share with me. And I had seen like a headline suggesting that outside the DNC, outside the United Center, it's taking place in Chicago here, they are giving out free abortions and free vasectomies. So you are confirming that is in fact true? Because I wasn't sure.
That is in fact true. That is not fake news.
I mean, Jim, you could pop in on this too, because I mean, like I understand. Let me be careful how I phrase this. I understand the abortion thing going on. Like I don't agree with it, and I think it's entirely like weird and inappropriate to have like at your party's convention and all of that. But I get it from like the narrative perspective, where they've been trying to paint this picture for years and years and years, that Republicans want to control women's reproductive rights. So let's give a middle finger to that straw man by allowing abortions to take place outside our political party's celebration. Again, weird, gross, but like I get it from like that narrative perspective. But vasectomies? Are there any Republicans out there that are proposing bans on vasectomies? Because I've never heard of that. So Jim, is this just like, are they just leaning into the anti-human aspects of the Democratic Party? What do you think?
Well, this is the same party that at the same time will say that they're the pro-family party. And from both ends, they are trying to prevent as many families as being created as possible. Actually, I think it's every time you think that some kind of stunt or policy position by the left is too wacky, they out-wacky themselves over and over again. You have to understand, this is what equity looks like. See, Kamala Harris speaks a lot about equity, not equality under the law. Not all men and women are created, not all people, I suppose. Let's be correct here. Not all people are created equal. Nothing like that. Equity. And so to have an equitable reproductive healthcare center, you must also offer free vasectomies. And besides, if all men, all Democratic men get vasectomies, and I really do hope that this is well trafficked by the beta males that are showing up at the Democratic National Convention in Chicago, and especially the protesters outside. I hope there is a long queue outside that wherever they're doing the vasectomy. What is it, in a trailer or something? Maybe in the back of a box truck or something. Yeah, everybody go ahead. Everybody that's at this convention, go ahead. Queue up, line up, get your vasectomy. And I think in about 10 to 15 years, the next generation might be a better generation to hand over a country that's supposed to be founded in freedom.
It's just crazy. It's crazy. It's just crazy, Chris. I mean, come on. Vasectomies and abortions outside the DNC. I mean, that's like a like a Babylon Bee headline. Like that's why I didn't believe it. I was like,
I
this
gotta
can't be
say,
true.
I'm surprised that you guys are surprised, because this to me is just par for the course for the DNC and for the Democrat Party in the year of 2024. This is what they stand for. They stand
So
for abortions. They stand for lying about Donald Trump's record and lying about what he will do. I watched a little bit of Tim Walz's speech last night, and Tim Walz said that Donald Trump will ban abortions even without Congress's approval. So, I mean, I guess he's just going to declare by fiat that abortions are no longer allowed. What did he also do? He also claimed that Donald Trump. I mean, it was just like everything he said was completely dishonest, and untrue. But that's what they do. And unfortunately, when I do watch the mainstream media coverage of this, they just, they refuse to fact check. They refuse to question these disingenuous, statements made by all these Democrats. So, whatever.
yeah, I think the only addition that they can make, maybe they can consider this for the 2028 convention, is they should have like mobile euthanasia pods or something
Mm.
like that. If
Yeah.
people's just it's life is too much for them, go join one of our pods. It's right next to the vasectomy mobile
re-
vasectomy clinic.
Real quick, the other thing that Tim Walz said that just made my blood boil was Donald Trump wants to basically eliminate Social Security. That's just completely not true. And Donald Trump had on several occasions has said, "No, I don't. I never wanted to do that. I've never said I wanted to do that. If anything, I want to actually protect Social Security. And hey, Democrats, you guys are the ones who are bankrupting Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid. So it's just
No, I can't listen to it.
absurd."
Jim, I actually saw one tiny little, like literally like 15 seconds of Michelle Obama speaking the other day, and you reminded me of it, I think this morning, where you were saying how she was like making a big deal about her like mother or something like that, instilling these values that like you have to be skeptical of people that take too much or something like that, right? Take too much, and it's like this is coming from the couple that's got mansions all over the place, like multi-millionaires, if not like billionaires at this point. I don't know. So yeah, it's the lack of kind of self identification there is just kind of stunning. But again, I don't know. Maybe I shouldn't be stunned by this stuff anymore. But
Yeah, well, yeah, when Michelle Obama says that people that take too much, she's talking about the rich, excluding herself, of course. But that's it. There's all sorts of little. I have watched very little of this. I've seen clips on social media. I've pretty much unplugged from all stuff while my family was here visiting. We had a great time. So and part of that is making sure I'm not polluting my brain with all of this nonsense. But I did see that clip of Michelle Obama saying that the people who take too much, those are people that are to be skeptical of and to look down upon. And it's the mentality that the government owns everything and that other people are taking it. So if you're successful, if you earn a good salary, if you start a small business and create employment for dozens of other people, or if you start a big business and create employment opportunities for thousands of people, you are taking something from everybody else apparently in this mindset. And so when the wonderful, this is a top 10 thumbnail for this podcast today, Donnie. Kommie-la, which is my favorite nickname for her. So I love that. But it really is a communist and socialist mentality that everything belongs to the state, and people are just taking from it, taking from the people. It's completely reversed and backwards in the way a successful and prosperous society is created and prospers. The one last thing is like Phil Donahue. Viewers and listeners of a certain age remember Phil Donahue. He was very popular. He was Oprah before there was Oprah. So he had his talk show, and so he passed away. I think he was 89, just recently. He's always been a liberal to a leftist his whole life. His show would sometimes be kind of obnoxious as he would be pushing his liberal mindset on middle American housewives all across the country, afternoon after afternoon during the 80s. Well, one day he had Milton Friedman on, the great free market economist, Nobel Prize winning Milton Friedman on. And he was trying to corner Milton Friedman on the idea, or at least Phil Donahue's perspective, that capitalism rewards greed. And greed is not good, and greed is evil, and greed is harmful. And you should look this up on YouTube. It's very easy to find. Just put in, or you could just Google Phil Donahue, Milton Friedman, and the video will come up. It is a masterclass in explaining how the left and, well, the Democratic Party today and liberals have for decades always had it completely backwards. Milton Friedman explained that it's not greed to pursue your own self-interests. It is actually a system in which individuals have the freedom to pursue their own self-interests and that of their family is the only system that has ever created prosperity in human existence. It's proven fact that that's how it works. And the idea that a government bureaucrat is not greedy, that the Soviet commissar is not greedy, but only a businessman in the United States who is trying to maximize profit is greedy. It's amazing. That clip must have been from 30 years ago, 40 years ago. And the left, we are still having to have these conversations. And that it's sad that so many voters apparently will still buy the hokum that socialism is kindness and sharing and goodness, and capitalism and freedom are evil. But that looks to be what's on the election, or on the ballot in this election.
Well, Tim Walz, once said, one man's socialism and another one's being neighborly.
Yes, that's right. That's right. That's right. I mean, exactly that. It's insane.
All right, let's jump into our primary topic because we have like 4 or 5 specific policies that I want to drill down into here. So Kamala Harris is the candidate. Joe Biden has been kicked to the curb. So now, even though she's part of that same administration, the messaging has gone from the economy is good. You can't even tell, that's you think the economy's floundering. No, it's actually great. But with Kamala in, now the message has shifted to don't worry about the floundering economy. Once I get in office, I'm going to fix it. So how is Kamala going to do this? Well, she's been throwing out a number of economic policy proposals. So I want to go through a bunch of these one at a time. So I don't have these in any particular order. I'm just going to go into the ones that I think are more interesting first. So the first one I want to talk about is the idea of $25,000 credit to new home buyers. So this policy solution is predicated on the reality that home prices have been skyrocketing. According to data from the St. Louis Fed, in just the past 10 years, the average housing prices in the country has gone up roughly 50%. And since the middle of 2020, the average housing prices has gone up basically 40% in just 4 years. On top of that, in the effort to cool off the massive run of inflation that we've been suffering with over the past couple of years, the Fed has jacked up the interest rates. So the cost of financing a house has also massively increased. So these realities have basically, helped put home ownership increasingly out of reach for millions of Americans. But don't worry, everybody. We have the brightest minds. She's right there. He's right on the screen. Brightest minds out there working on these problems. So what do these bright minds come up with? Well, Kamala Harris has proposed having the government offer $25,000 in financial assistance to all first-time homebuyers in the country. Harris claims the assistance would be provided to more than 4 million people over the first term in office. So boom, ladies and gentlemen, problem solved. Chris, I want to start with you on this one. What's your problem with this great idea?
Where do I begin? I mean, there are so many problems with this idea. You also didn't mention that it would actually increase the down payment assistance if you are a newcomer to the United States.
Oh, good.
So they haven't even actually specified whether those newcomers would include illegal immigrants or just legal immigrants. But that is obviously unconstitutional on its face. So, I mean, it's hard for me to take this plan seriously because it's not going to go anywhere. There's no way Congress is going to approve this. It would actually make the situation far worse. It would basically increase the price of every house by $25,000. I mean, this is not that difficult to understand. I find it, pretty funny that that she's doing this and thinking that most Americans are going to be like, oh yeah, that's great. Well, I think that most Americans are going to actually think to themselves, why would the government want to be getting involved in the housing market in the first place? What happened the last time the government really got involved in the housing market? Oh yeah, 2007, 2008, big crash. Oh yeah. So back then the government, and this goes back to the Community Reinvestment Act in the 1970s, and Jimmy Carter said, hey, everybody in America, you should have a home. That's the American dream. You should just have a home. We're going to, we the government are going to make it easier for you to get into a home. Well, what happened? You gave people mortgages who had no business getting a mortgage, the notorious NINJA, no income, no job mortgage. And eventually, you know what happened? They couldn't make those payments and the entire housing system collapsed. Do we want to do that again? Because, I'm still trying to get into a house. And yeah, right now it's totally unaffordable. But having the federal government get involved in building 3 million homes and giving everyone $25,000 in helicopter money ain't going to help the problem. It's going to make it worse.
Yeah, you know what? So I wasn't sure. I mean, I've seen kind of conflicting things, but I had seen Elizabeth Warren talking about this problem of housing prices, and I was actually surprised to see that her proposed solution, or at least the part of it that she was like talking about on Twitter, was based around the idea of like building millions of more homes. So is that part of Kamala's plan as well, is to build a bunch more homes in addition to giving the
Well, I mean,
$25,000 assistance?
yeah. That's what she's saying. But remember, you can't take these things seriously because they're just being floated out there like trial balloons. And once again, the federal government should not be involved in the home building business. Okay, that should be done in what's called the private sector. And you know
Never
what would
heard of it.
actually, some people have, some people haven't. You know what would actually really help this housing shortage? If a bunch of states and local governments said, you know what, we're finally once and for all going to make it easier for you to build a new home. Because in my neck of the woods, the northern suburbs of Chicagoland, it is nearly impossible to build a new home because you have to get this permit, and you have to get this, and this, and the other thing. And I read all the time in the Daily Herald and the Chicago Tribune how blankety blank development in blankety blank suburb was rejected by this borough for this reason. That's why. That's
Right.
why there's a shortage of houses going on right now. And just to show how bad it is in the place where Kamala comes from, San Francisco, they've been doing this for decades. They've already done all the rent controls and all that. Rent controls don't work because all it does is it helps those who are in the apartment at that point in time, but it disincentivizes the construction of new apartments. Because why are you going to build a new apartment if you know beforehand that you can only charge such and such for rent? So these are all just pie in the sky proposals that I think she hopes are going to resonate with misinformed, basically stupid voters who probably tend to vote, for the Democrats on most things. So I just think that she's just doing this to try to try to just gin up some support. But obviously it's not going to work. Obviously it's not going to actually happen.
Yeah, I mean, out of those two, if those are two separate things, obviously I'd be more in favor of why don't you just build a whole bunch more homes? If these are part of the same package, I would be very hesitant. I think the kind of the market manipulation of the $25,000 is just going to inflate inflate the price of homes by $25,000. And if the idea is to build a bunch of more homes as part of that plan, I wouldn't hold my breath. I would assume that it would be far too slow and far too few homes to really drive.
Let me
pressure
just
to
put this
drive
in.
the
Yeah. But
prices
let me just put
downward.
this in a context real quick. So a couple of years ago, we did this thing called the bipartisan infrastructure law, which was $1.2 trillion. In that the federal government was supposed to build all these charging stations.
All right.
It got billions and billions of dollars.
Yeah.
3 years later, guess how many have been built?
Like
Less than
62.
10. Less than 10. Less than 10. So, I mean, this is just, this is what happens. The federal government just tries to throw money at things,
Yeah.
and it never works. It
Right.
can't work. This is best solved by the private sector and unleashing the indisputable laws of supply and demand and letting our free market economy just do its thing.
Jim, I mean, the idea, this solution would, on its face, like I said, probably just inflate the cost of housing by $25,000 while increasing government spending by, if you're taking her word that this is going to be doled out to 4 million people, $100 billion. So, are you signing on to this plan, Jim?
No, I mean, this is more of the same. I mean, Chris has said just about all the thoughts I had on this particular topic for the pod today. But this is exactly what got us into our inflationary mess to begin with. It was one of the main factors of it was printing money and shoveling it out the door after COVID for COVID recovery. Everybody was getting what, $1,000 or $1,200 check, and then the prices of new cars and used cars also went up about $1,200 at precisely the same time. This is socialism. This is not going to work. And if you thought the housing crisis of 2008 was awesome and you would like to repeat that, then let's go ahead with policies like this. Because of course, the first thing that will happen is that all housing will increase by $25,000. So it accomplishes nothing except for ballooning an already enormous deficit and national debt for no actual purpose. And yeah, I was going to bring up the idea that we've spent, I think, $20 billion, maybe somebody could look it up for me, but billions of dollars to create all of these charging stations for electric vehicles for Joe Biden and Kamala Harris's electric vehicle future. And precisely 7 have been built. And I would actually like it if we had an operating press these days, they would actually go visit those 7 charging stations that we've paid billions of dollars for.
5
and to
of them
see how
were out of
well they
commission.
actually work, if they're actually being used, where are these things located? Are they actually even being used? Or are they already broken?
Right.
Because if there's one thing that government created housing or infrastructure is infamous for, it is for breaking and being absolute garbage. So, a socialist housing program is what we can look forward to if this election goes in a certain direction, I suppose.
Yeah, there's a couple of other things that came to mind when I was reading up about this $25,000 thing. It's essentially what's going on with college tuition. It's just resulting in
100%.
ever increasing tuition costs by subsidizing the consumer. You're taking out the innate price controls, and we'll get into price controls that are built into that whole supply and demand thing. You're just throwing that out the window, right? But I also had a couple of other fears, and one of them is that let's say we start this $25,000 credit to new home buyers. Do you think that will ever go away? Because if you do, you're crazy. I mean, you could think of a whole bunch of different subsidies out there. The first thing that came to my mind was like the corn subsidies and stuff for like ethanol. Like we are still doing that, because once subsidies are like injected into the market, you can't get it out because the market kind of incorporates it, right? The other thing is that I think, now this is just speculation, me being cynical of big government operations like this. I think that these subsidies will accrue attached strings. So yeah, you can get your $25,000, but it's only towards housing that's considered green or something like that. Like just wait. Like this is just another avenue for them to kind of push their agenda in different ways. So if you think that like they're just going to hand out money like willy-nilly to anybody, just give it a little bit of time. They'll start attaching some strings to it and all of that sort of thing. So those are 2 other thoughts that I had in mind when talking about this. But any other thoughts about this $25,000 for housing, or we're going to move on to the next one?
Well, I would just say, just to your point, that if this was implemented and then somebody wanted to come along and cut it and get rid of it because it's a terrible economic policy, they would be accused of trying to crush the American dream for millions of Americans.
Exactly.
And that happens no matter what you try to do. And as you were talking about that, Donnie, it made me think of Javier Milei in Argentina, where he promised to cut out entire programs like Donald Trump has promised to just get rid of the Federal Department of Education. And of course, gloom and doom and panic, and you're going to crush people were all the predictions. And he did not care at all about what people said about him. He just went ahead and did it. And what's happening in Argentina now? They probably have the healthiest economy, certainly in all of South America, and one of the healthiest and most booming economies in the entire world. And it happened like that. It's amazing the power of the private sector when you can get as much government the hell out of the way as possible.
Right, right. All right, let's move on to price controls. So, no, you know what? I don't want to phrase it that way. I want to phrase it like this. Let's talk about sticking it to those price gouging, greedy corporations. Am I right, comrades? So, this this is the narrative of the left. Inflation is actually just the result of every business deciding to band together and raise prices out of this newfound greediness, just giving off the illusion of inflation. So, what are the great minds proposing to deal with this phantom menace? Well, Harris is proposing new limits on raising costs, imposing harsh penalties on businesses that break new limits on price gouging. It's all very vague and undefined. Her administration has released nothing official, no definitions of these new limits or penalties or even what price gouging is. But if the proposals match the rhetoric, I think we're looking down the barrel of some big government price controls here. So, I mean, this is just basic economic stuff that they're trifling with here. You can't just like throw out the laws of supply and demand on the altar of the greater good. Chris, I've got some other things to say about this, but feel free to jump in. I mean, this is going to have some pretty serious consequences, will it not?
Of course it will. It's not even a question. But go ahead. I want to hear what you think first more.
Well, I mean, we were talking about this a little bit. Yeah. What I was trying to tee you up for is just basically the premise that, you know, all of these businesses, these firms, these corporations, whatever, grocery stores, even, I think when it comes to inflation, most people are care more about their grocery bill than anything. They're out there just raking in the cash. Just, you know what? This bag of chips, $2 yesterday. I'm greedy today. It's going to be $5. Like, that premise is super faulty, is it not?
Of course, it is super faulty. The grocery store operates on very, very thin margins. 1.6% is the average. That means that grocery store CEOs are not, you know, swimming in $100 bills and just, oh, let's raise the price of Doritos $10, ha ha ha, and just recoup all the profits. That's just not happening. And I mean, it is just so like superficial for her to think that we will buy the you know, this argument that, oh, it's these greedy corporations who are somehow across the entire economic sector all cavorting together to do this, because there are so many like just ways to, you know, to just poke a, you know, a needle in that balloon. Well, why wouldn't one grocery store just chain say, hey, we want to undercut everyone else and have all the people come here? I mean, that's one thing to say. How about this? The fact that the price of energy is up 30%, you know, since Biden Harris have come into office. Last time I checked, grocery stores have to pay to have things shipped to their stores. They also have to pay to have the lights on, the air conditioning when it's hot, and the heat on when it's cold. So these are all inputs that are increasing. The wholesale price of most, you know, items, whether it's orange juice or anything, is through the roof. Eggs, you know, just across the board. And this is not just the grocery store, you know, this is not just a situation of price inflation at the grocery stores. This is happening everywhere. It's happening in the car industry. It's happening in the school supply industry. It's happening everywhere because the inflationary pressures that were created when Kamala Harris, never forget, she was the tie-breaking vote on the 1.9 trillion American Rescue Plan and the 1.2 trillion bipartisan infrastructure law. That's 3+ trillion just being flooded into the economy. Mm-hmm. That is what is responsible for the vast majority of inflation. That, coupled with the fact that they are artificially reducing the supply of natural gas and oil production here in the United States. Now, I watch a lot of news, and I loved when Biden Harris surrogates get up there and say, "What are you talking about? We have record oil and gas production." Sorry, but that is you know, just so easily, you know, argued against. Yeah, we do have a record high, but you know what? We could have 2 million more, you know, barrels per day. We could have 5 million more barrels per day if they would actually undo all the restrictions that they put in place on the oil and natural gas sector, coupled with all the subsidies and all the goodies that they're handing out for the green energy stuff. So I'm just so sick and tired of hearing, what are you talking about? The United States is producing the most natural gas and oil ever. Yeah, but we should be producing probably 20 to 30% more, which would make the price of it go down, because the more you have of something, the less it costs. So there are just so many underlying factors that they are just ignoring and saying it's all about those greedy corporations. And if we just stick it to them and tell them, hey, you can't raise the price of bacon to this, then that's just going to somehow magically solve it. And just think about how preposterous that is. So the federal government is going to determine the price of an apple. Okay, maybe 200 years ago, when there was like one apple, like one type of apple, like maybe that's okay. Last time I went to the grocery store, there's like 80 different types of apple. You got your organic this, you got your this, that, you got your pesticide free this. So not all apples can be priced the same. That's just one product. Grocery stores have tens, if not hundreds of thousands of products in there. How is the government going to be able to come up with a calculation for the cost of every single one of those products? It's impossible. This has been tried time and time again. The Soviet Union tried this. Cuba's tried this. Venezuela has tried this. Every single time it's happened, every single time price controls have even been, introduced at all, it leads to shortages. This is just like, we've got more than 100 years of experience with these things, yet they're acting like this has never been tried before. This is a brand new policy that we just concocted, and we're going to do it, and we're going to do it right this time. No, you're not. And it's going to make things so much worse. But I think maybe 20% of the American people just like buy this stuff like hook, line, and sinker. Just say, oh yeah, great, of course, the government should set prices. But I think 80% of the people know that that would actually make things 10 times worse. Just like her housing plan would make things worse, and just like all of her economic plans are going to make things worse. So, I don't think this is going to resonate with most people. I really don't.
Well, it's the power of all of these solutions that we're talking about. It's just like, if you look at it for like 1 second, like on its face, it's like, great, $25,000, like that'll help me buy a house. Oh, you don't want to let food costs go up? That's fantastic. But it's like what like Milton Friedman and all of these like free market economists have like shown, is just like, you look just one layer deeper, and all of these things have these unintended consequences, and all of these, the complications of these, just like on its face solutions. So this was a great thread that I saw on Twitter, where this guy Robert Sterling was breaking down basically step by step of what you should expect if this kind of Kamala Harris style kind of price control system was kind of unleashed on the American economy. And he goes through like 15 different steps of what's going to happen, or what would theoretically happen. And I won't read through the whole thing, but it just basically shows a lot of the stuff. It highlights a lot of the stuff Chris was just talking about, the wholesale prices, all that sort of things. But just the negative pressure that it would have on these grocery stores. And it talks about how not all grocery stores are created equal, and how certain stores that are in certain areas of the country are going to be strained even more by this type of regulations and all of that. And where you're going to see is like what you would see play out over a number of years is basically like an Atlas Shrugged type situation, where the entire industry just starts to crumble. And then what's that going to result in? Is the government going to have like a realization like, oh, we're actually screwing up the the industry that we were trying to solve. Let's undo it. No, they're just going to double down on even more stuff and just try to bail out failing stores. And what you're going to see is just like a slide towards larger government. Jim, I mean, the media treatment of this plan has actually been a little interesting. I mean, some of it, I'll get to a little bit on a different topic, where they just kind of give cover for whatever solutions come from people with a D in front of their name. But with this one, even like the Washington Post and like USA Today were like, yeah, this solution, it's not great, guys. So it's just like one of the dumbest things that like a presidential candidate's come out with, or what do you think?
I mean, well, the media is going to continue to run cover for Kamala Harris, of course, all the way through to the election. But even the Washington Post had an op-ed or a column by Catherine Rampel. Headline was, "When your opponent calls you communist, maybe don't propose price controls," and especially on groceries. So when the Washington Post is there it is, Donnie or Andy, thank you. when the Washington Post is like, I don't know about that, then maybe you should back off of that a little bit. But of course, if you're a leftist, you just lean into the bad. So they continue moving forward with this sort of thing. I mean, Chris, just on price controls and so-called price gouging real quick here. Chris is correct that under this plan, under price controls, it will be up to government bureaucrats to determine what is the proper price that consumers should pay for literally thousands, innumerable, really, just think of it that way, innumerable products, that it's impossible for any army of bureaucrats, let alone a handful or even just one, to just determine on their own, on a national scale, what the price of a pound of peaches should be, or a sack of potatoes should be. And every single time price controls are imposed on food, especially, you end up with starvation. You end up with bread lines every time. And for an American major party candidate to be proposing with a smile on her face and a thumbs up the idea of price controls on groceries, and for people to not and for the entire country not to be laughing their heads off at such an absurd thing is an indictment really on maybe our whole public education system in this country, because it is so absurd. Now, again, as Chris pointed out, the price gouging that she is accusing grocery chains, for instance, of engaging in groceries, as everybody should know, are on very, very small margins, as you mentioned, as was mentioned in that tweet that you brought up, Donnie, 1% to 2% margins. And so, they depend on volume, right? And it's a very hard business to be in and to succeed in. All the grocery chains have to have gotten together to collude to raise the prices of eggs exactly the same percent all the way across the board.
Right.
Or else, if they didn't do that, then you would just go to the grocery store half a mile down the road in your suburb and get your eggs over there for $1.50 less a dozen. And so, unless they are all colluding together, price gouging can't happen, which means price gouging doesn't really exist, except in certain cases. And I saw this on X. I didn't share the link with producer Andy, but I will summarize it. And this is it was making the case that sometimes price gouging in certain situations is a good thing. Mm-hmm. And say, for instance, you're fleeing a hurricane in Florida,
right? And
you're trying to get out of the storm damage zone, and you come across a hotel, and you and your family of 4, or you and your family of 6 pull in. You got grandma and grandpa with you too, and your 2 kids and husband and wife. You go to the front desk, and they say, we need a hotel room because of the hurricane's coming. And they say, okay, it's going to be $600 a night. Actually, yeah, we want 2 hotel rooms, and it's going to be $600 for each room. And you say, we can't afford that. They say, well, it's $600 a night. And you say, but on the sign, it says it's $99 a night. It's like, well, tonight it's $600 a night. So that family has to decide, well, we can't afford $1,200 for 2 hotel rooms. And it might not be as comfortable as we would like, but we're going to cram all 6 of us into this one hotel room for the night, just until the storm passes, and then we can go home. Now, you may think that is an evil, terrible thing to do. But what it actually does is that a second family coming up, another family of 6, instead of having that entire hotel filled with people paying $99 a night or even $300 a night, instead of it being full, there are rooms available if you can pay $600. So instead of having to travel another, who knows how many hundreds of miles, or maybe not even getting out of the storm zone, that other family is also able to find a room in that hotel. Mm-hmm. So that is one of those cases, and I never really thought of it that way but it makes logical sense until I saw that tweet thread from an economist on Twitter. And it's like, yes, the price of things are related to the need. It's like basic supply and demand. Well, there's a limited number of hotel rooms if you're trying to flee a storm zone in Florida. So the way to most effectively manage those hotel rooms so that as many people can get to them as possible in that area, there are price adjustments to make that happen. That's called economics.
Wait, I got a better
stuff. It's called socialism and politics and BS.
Yeah, I got a better example of that because there is actually another strain of kind of narrative in the media when it comes to this price control idea, where they're like, oh, this isn't anything new. There's actually 37 states out there that have price control things. And it's specifically in regards to this, the idea that like a hurricane comes through and there's restrictions on businesses like jacking up the price of like water bottles or something like that, right? So they're like, oh, this is essentially the same thing, which to me it's not, because it's like that's under like some declaration of emergency or something. So that there's a big difference there. Like, is Kamala Harris's plan based on like a declaration of emergency? I would think not. And even if it did, that scares me in its own right. But to your point of that price gouging thing, my favorite example is the idea of like the like gas generators or something, where a storm comes through, everyone loses power, whatever, and the cost of gas generators skyrockets in the area. And when the government comes in and says, no, you can't sell a gas generator for more than what the price was before the storm, that is removing the price signal that's out there that would encourage other people from outside the affected area to bring in gas generators to try to make a little bit of profit off of that. If they're not allowed to sell a gas generator at a higher rate, there's no incentive for that. So what are you going to have? Less gas generators in the area. It's absolutely ridiculous. But again, it's like, if you look at it just on its face, we don't want to price gouge people. It makes sense. If you dig one layer deeper, it falls apart.
Yeah, I mean, even with the water bottle example, it's like, so if you can't raise the price of water, what you're going to do is, if you're the first one there at the store to get bottled water, what are you going to do? You're going to overbuy bottled water. You don't need 7 cases of bottled water. Come on, let's be real. You need 2, but you're going to buy 7 just in case. That's just kind of human nature, because it's so cheap, because it's the regular price. If it's 300% higher, guess what? You'll actually end up just buying the 2 you need. And you'll get by. And what that does is it allows other people to get access to those resources to bring home. The same thing with power generators. It doesn't just disincentivize people bringing them in. You're going to run out of power generators in about 20 minutes at every Home Depot within 10 miles of your store. But if the price is signaling, the price signal is reactive to the demand, then it's actually more efficiently and better distributed among the people who really need that power generator. So
the difference is very simple. I mean, you guys are spot on with the situation in an emergency, but just in terms of the overall structure of the economy, Adam Smith determined that this thing called the invisible hand determines prices. Kamala Harris and Tim Walz think that the government should determine prices. 300 years of experience shows that when you let the free market left to its own devices, the prices are stable. They reflect accurately the demand for said product at said point in time. But the more you try to micromanage the economy, the more you cloud price signals, the more you're going to have shortages, the more you're going to have rationing, the more you're just going to have economic upheaval. And that is a very simple argument to make.
Yeah, no, absolutely. It's just, no, let's just throw it all out just for the greater good, and then call it a day. All right, let's move on to the next thing. So Harris wants to hike the corporate tax rate back up to 28%. So this is actually an issue that we spent a fair amount of time on in past episodes, talking about the corporate income tax. This was particularly a topic of discussion back when Trump was busy pushing the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act. That legislation cut the corporate tax rate back from a staggering 35% to a far more reasonable 21%. And just for context, out of the OECD countries, the pre-tax Tax Cuts and Jobs Act corporate tax rate in America was the highest of all of the OECD countries. And the 35% tax rate is a little misleading, because you also have to factor in the state corporate tax rate as well. And depending on the state, this could be an additional 0% if you're in like Texas or something like that, or it could be as high as 12% additional corporate tax. So averaged together, and I think we have a chart here. If you could share that link that I sent in the private chat. Yeah, right here. This is from the Tax Foundation. So averaged together, the pre-Tax Cuts and Jobs Act corporate tax rate in the United States was 37.5%, right there at the very tippy top, that big old scary red line at the top there. After the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, the reduced rate was down to 21%. If you include the states and all of that, whatever, then it equates to 24.6%, which still put the United States in kind of the upper middle of the pack of these list of countries here. Harris's proposal to increase the tax rate back to 28% on that federal level will likely place the averaged rate around 32-ish%, which again puts us right back on top of this entire list here. So again, we've talked about this in past episodes, but a high corporate income tax rate would likely discourage business investment. It would encourage companies to move operations overseas. It would reduce international competitiveness. It would likely lead to higher consumer prices as the cost of the tax compliance is factored into the price of goods. Additionally, the Tax Foundation did some analysis on this proposal when it was originally talked about by the Biden administration. And their analysis showed that it would reduce long-run economic output, eliminate 159,000 jobs, and reduce average wages just by a little bit. So, Jim, I guess I'll go to you first on this one. This is just one out of several tax increases that Kamala is proposing, and I'll get to those towards the end of the episode. This one might be the kind of the one with the largest implications. What are your thoughts when you hear her wanting to increase that tax rate back up?
Well, yeah. I mean, she just wants the economy. The economy is already struggling to get back on its feet, and this would actually just basically kneecap it before it can actually get going. And listeners to this podcast and smart people understand that corporations don't pay taxes. Individuals pay taxes. The tax rate is baked into the services they provide you, and you end up paying that for them, not them, not the corporation. So this idea that the corporations are getting a free ride, there is no free ride. We end up paying that ourselves, and so I mean, we could talk about the corporate tax rate, but just the idea of this goes back to where we kind of started. Quoting Michelle Obama, saying that people who take too much are the problem in this country, and I agree with that actually. But the people who take too much is the government, not individuals in the private sector, not individuals as us, and also not corporations in the private sector. They're not taking too much. They are the providers of everything. It is the government that is always taking. And in this case, we want Kamala Harris and Tim Walz want to go back to where in the United States, the government is taking more money from the private sector and through its, the productive private sector than any other country in the with modern economies. And so, again, that's on the ballot. And people, I hope, understand that one of the reasons that the economy was better than most people could remember in their lifetimes during Donald Trump's brief 4 years in office was because of the tax cuts that he implemented, including the corporate tax rate. There is no reason whatsoever that a country founded on freedom and free market capitalism and the free markets should have the highest corporate tax rate in the world. And it's not as if Donald Trump cut it down to nothing or cut it to 4%. He just wanted to get us somewhere in the middle of the pack with the other countries that we're competing with internationally. And that apparently is too much for the communists, for Kommie-la Harris and the Democrat Party. That's just we can't even be. They're always pointing to Europe as the example to follow, except here, I suppose.
Yeah, I mean, Chris, we've done work on the supposed socialist, Nordic states or whatever that aren't actually really socialists. But one of the sections I remember when we did that booklet all those years ago was showing the kind of the corporate tax rate of Sweden and these places. And if I recall correctly, it was in like kind of the lower 20s.
Far lower than the current, and extremely far lower than what the Harris administration wants to bring it back to.
Right. And Europe, I read just in an article when I was doing prep for this, in Europe, the average corporate tax rate across the European Union is 21%, and communist China, 25%. So I think we want to make our corporate tax rate higher than China.
Well,
This seems
I'm going to
crazy.
go back to my old job where I actually did teach economics to high school students, and I remember I taught macroeconomics, and one of the first things on day one was, and this was how I usually framed it: government can create wealth. All government can do is take wealth from wealth creators. Who creates wealth? Individuals and businesses, entrepreneurs, innovators. That's who create wealth. So, do you want to disincentivize more wealth creation and give it to the government so they can redistribute that or spend it on, frivolous things? Most of the students would put their hand up and say, "No, of course not. I want to keep most of my money." And I would ask them, like, "Hey, those of you who have a job, do you think you should actually pay more taxes to the government so the government can do more things? Or would you rather keep more of your money and have the government do less?" Almost 90% of them, of course, I want to keep more and let the government do less.
Right.
But, it becomes, I guess, more of an abstract concept when you talk about corporate taxes. And I think most people just think, yeah, of course, corporations have all this money on the side. Yeah, they can, afford it. Yeah, but like Jim said, guess what? That's going to get passed on to the consumer somehow, some way. It has to. It always will. And really, what I think this is about is the Kamala Harris, administration. If she wins, she wants to increase government spending big time. And in order to increase government spending, what does she have to do? Raise more taxes. So she's on the mindset, well, if we just raise tax rates, we'll get more tax revenue. There's this thing called the Laffer curve. And guess what happens? When you lower tax rates, you get more economic growth. When you get more economic growth, you get more revenue. Donald Trump's 2017 Tax Cuts and Jobs Act proved that yet again. And just one other thing here, if we're going to talk about tax cuts and the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, which was actually going to sunset fairly soon if nothing's done to revive it. Guess what's going to happen? We're going to have humongous deficits, humongous $2 trillion plus for years to come, for decades to come. So really what this really should spur is a conversation long overdue, decades long overdue, on government spending. And you know what? Unless and until, and I mean, I'll put the Trump administration in this boat too, he did not do enough to cut government spending.
Sure.
And I really hope that if Donald Trump does win in 2024, that he actually puts forth a plan to at least curb government spending, because we cannot keep spending. We have $35 trillion in a national debt.
Right.
Eventually,
Yeah.
eventually our interest payments on the national debt are going to be such a large line item in our budget that they're going to dwarf everything else. They already dwarf how much we spend per year on our military. So this is something that is a macroeconomic problem of massive implications that really needs to be dealt with sooner rather than later. And Kamala Harris is kick the can down the road of, well, we'll just raise income tax rates and corporate tax rates, and hopefully the wealthy will pay more. First of all, they're not going to pay more. You know why? Because the wealthy have really good tax lawyers, and they have lobbyists who work on their behalf to make sure that they don't have to pay those taxes. The average American is going to be the one who's going to be hit hardest by this, just like the average American is the one who's been hit hardest by all the inflation of the past 3.5 years under Joe Biden and Kamala Harris. So all this talk about, because I hear this stuff just nonstop, daily, just, never ending. Donald Trump is for the wealthy, and Republicans want to help all those, those big corporations, and Democrats are for the hardworking, middle class and lower class and small business. Just not true. Just
Right.
completely 1000% not true on its face. And I just hope, and I saw some comments in here saying that I was way over exaggerating, that 80% of the American people see through this, charade and these shenanigans. I hope that it is 80% of the people, because we need 80% of the people to just come in and have an overwhelming landslide victory to show once and for all that we need to deal with our economic problems that we've been kicking the can down the road on for way too long. I remember back in the good old days of Barack Obama, when Paul Ryan was talking about a debt bomb, and they actually almost came close to a grand bargain. It was the Simpson-Bowles Commission, if I remember correctly, and that was actually going to cut spending. And what happened? It didn't. It didn't come to fruition. Didn't come to fruition because apparently Barack Obama kind of changed the goalpost at the last minute and said, no, we don't want to do this. But we need something like that. We need a 2024 Simpson-Bowles Commission to come in and say, guys, federal government is involved in way too much stuff. They're spending way too much money. They're taxing everything way too much. They're subsidizing things that have no business being subsidized. We need to get our economic house in order.
Well, this is something that everyone has to understand, okay? Because I think like your average person or whatever, when they hear somebody pitching some specific number, we want to raise the corporate income tax to 28%. It's like, oh, 28%. Oh, that's interesting. Like, I wonder how they came up with 28%. Must be a bunch of economists back there, like, doing some slide charts and figuring out what the optimal, thing is. And it's not at all. The reality is it's just politically advantageous. They think that, we're going to put this out there, the negative stigma against giant corporations. People won't even flinch at the idea of raising taxes on them. So let's do that. That's as much thinking goes into these solutions. That's it. That's the limit. That's the upper limit of how much thinking goes into these solutions.
Well, the thing that kind of burns me is the idea that the problem that we have in society right now in America is that we are not taxed enough.
Right.
That is so absurd. I mean, you guys were talking, it reminded me, I think it was the season premiere way back in the 90s of the show Friends. The character of Rachel came from a very wealthy family, had never worked a day in her life, but she was forced to take a job at Central Perk. And then she gets her first paycheck and she looks at it and she says, "Hey, who's this FICA guy? Why is he taking all my money?"
Right.
She had never had the concept of working, of being taxed for your labor by the government. The idea that you should be giving, it should be a foundational principle. And this is really a humane attitude, I think, when it comes to tax policy. The idea that any human being, with the limited time they have on Earth, and the limited time they have to produce, to be a productive laborer, in however you want to define that, in their society. Like I said, you're only on this earth for a short time. The idea that government has claim to 50% or more of your labor for your entire life is immoral. There is no, in a sound, in a sane society, that whole concept would be absolutely inconceivable. Nobody in their right mind would think that government has claim to half the value of your labor for your entire life. You might even argue that 25%, government taking you being taxed 25% of your labor for your entire life to support society by giving it to government, even that is too high. God only asks for 10%. Government asks for 50% of your labor. And I shared just with personal income taxes. I had shared with you, Donnie, this morning on Slack a chart that showed that this was we haven't gotten into it. I guess we're going to get into the unrealized gains tax, which is another fantastic idea from communists to basically tax money you haven't even earned yet. That's a fantastic innovation. But the marginal income tax brackets in 1913, when we passed one of the worst amendments to the Constitution ever to impose the income tax, it was a 1% marginal tax rate for anybody who made in 2015 dollars. So this is actually even higher now. You didn't pay a cent in income tax unless you made $480,000 in 2015 dollars, not a cent to the federal government. And then, in fact, you paid as much as 5% if you made $6 million a year. So the income tax as implemented, like all of these taxes as implemented, promise only to, we're only going to go after the super rich. It's only going to affect these certain people. It's only going to affect the price gougers. It's only, these are the arguments that detestable Elizabeth Warren makes all the time. It may start that way, and it always ratchets up. So now, we have an income tax rate, a federal income tax that only affected the tiniest, what was it? It probably would have been 0.005% of the entire American population paid an income tax in 1913. Now we all pay income taxes unless you're poor, and then the government pays you instead of you paying income taxes. This is where it always this is where it always goes. But the idea that government has any claim, let alone 50% claim, and I mean all levels of government, to your labor with your limited time on earth, is an absolutely immoral argument. but that is the argument that that the left and the Democrats and the communists make.
In 1913, the size of the U.S. government and its spending was so much smaller. So what they did was they passed the amendment so that they could gradually increase the tax rate over time. And here we are 110 years later, and now we're in a place where income taxes are just so high that they are just ridiculous. And just a couple things, I just wrote a quick op-ed today about the jobs revision. So the Bureau of Labor Statistics just said, "Oh, whoops, we made a mistake. 818,000 jobs were not created over the past year." But I think that really is just the harbinger of things to come, because I did some research, and unfortunately, small business bankruptcies and large corporate bankruptcies are at record levels. That means that the foundations of the economy are really unstable. Raising taxes at a time right now where small businesses are struggling and even corporations are struggling, that is a recipe for a humongous disaster. And let's also remember that the backbone of the U.S. economy is not big corporations, it's small businesses. Most small businesses pay income taxes. So why would you want to disincentivize people from starting small businesses when small businesses are already struggling big time and have been struggling big time since the pandemic? This is all just going to make things, progressively worse.
Oh yeah, yeah. There's a whole bunch of other taxes that are being proposed, or at least supported or endorsed, whatever, by Kamala Harris. So there's a link in the show notes from Americans for Tax Reform, and it kind of goes through it. There's a whole laundry list. We won't spend time on all of these, but endorse a top marginal income tax rate of nearly 40%. This is the tax rate that Chris was just referencing that small businesses pay. Capital gains tax increased to 44.6%. And that's not including state. If you include state in some places like California, that would mean the capital gains tax would be as high as 59%. Additional death taxes, a quadrupling of the tax of stock buybacks, 30% tax on electricity used in cryptocurrency mining, billions of new taxes on energy companies, but don't worry, just on the evil, reliable ones. 32% increase in Medicare taxes, billions increase in taxes on retirement money. According to this document here, altogether, if you put all the taxes together, it's an additional $5 trillion in taxes. So yeah, sure, the economy will be doing just fine after that. But there's one other thing that I want to talk about. I know we're already long on time here, but I want to be fair and balanced, right? So yes, she's increasing the taxes and all of this stuff, or wants to. Yes, she wants to do all of these big spending programs, but there is one little area where she wants to reduce taxes. I know, it's true though. So some of Kamala's economic policies are just directly lifted from her political opponent. Okay, so starting just a few months ago, Trump started campaigning on the idea of no tax on tips. And it must have been polling well, because now Kamala Harris is echoing Trump's message on this idea. And at first, I just thought it was comical. Oh, he's saying service employees should be able to keep more of their money. That's polling well. Yeah, we're for that too. Yeah, absolutely. But then I recently found out, and apparently this was old news to Chris, but I didn't know this. Not only did Harris and Biden not support this position in the past, in fact, they marshaled the IRS to crack down on service employees' tip income. According to a different Americans for Tax Reform article, it says this IRS crackdown on tipped service industry workers was announced just months after the Biden-Harris administration and congressional Democrats spent $80 billion to increase the size and power of the IRS while including zero new taxpayer protections. So pretty big about face on this issue. But Jim or Chris, do you have any comments on this one here?
As someone who has worked in the service industry for many years as a caddy and just other odd jobs here and there, I think this is just reprehensible. And one way to try to avoid this, whenever you tip somebody, give them cash.
Right.
Give them cash. Don't put it on a credit card. Give them cash, because it's a lot easier for them to I probably shouldn't be saying this on here. It's a lot easier for them to not report that to the
theoretically,
when you know who.
Theoretically, when you leave a tip on a card, this is just what I've heard. I don't know if this is true. Then the system that it's all run through automatically will tax on those tips.
That's
If it's just in cash, the system just kind of assumes that it's somewhere in the 10% range, and the person might just keep the difference. So yeah, that does sound like good advice there, Chris. But hey, this is all just hypotheticals we're talking about. Jim, final thoughts on this topic in particular, or anything else we've talked about on the show so far?
Well, I want just kind of a overall point. I mean, people think that if they impose these sorts of tax policies, that there will not, it will not create underground economies or different ways for people to get around paying the tax. Speaking of confessions, we've all worked in the service industry, all of us, before, as young people, which is where a lot of people get their start. I worked for a pizza place. So it was just a small pizza joint. It wasn't a chain. It was owned by, a man, with a young family, and small business is a hard thing to keep afloat. If you're actually checking all of the tax boxes and all the boxes the government makes you want to do. So I worked for him, and I wasn't, let's just say I walked out with some cash in my pocket every day, and I wasn't necessarily a full-time employee over there. And his father also worked for him, and he wasn't on the books. He just worked to help out his son. It's actually quite common for, immigrant families in the United States to employ their kids as free labor because they can't afford, especially with the government mandated minimum wage hikes that we keep seeing over and over again, especially in places like California. They can't afford to run their business with inflation running through the roof. They can't afford to pay all the labor, so they have their kids basically work for free to keep the business afloat. The system is, if you impose these sorts of costs, these burdens on free enterprise will find ways to go underground. They will find black markets will emerge. And none of this is necessary. Again, the idea that the government of the United States is not taxing people enough, that it has a revenue problem instead of a spending problem, is absolutely absurd. And this kind of stuff needs to be talked about from an economics perspective frankly, by Donald Trump in the debate and on the campaign trail, to show that how these sorts of economic policies are horrible on the macro, and they are devastating in the micro when it comes to the small businesses that have to deal with these sorts of mandates and taxes, and they just can't stay afloat. They want to work. They want a successful business. They want their family to thrive, but it's the government that is always getting in the way and making that almost impossible. So if the Democrats, I think they're trying to make the focus of restoring the American dream. They're not doing that. They're trying to impose a socialist communist nightmare on this country that has failed in every country where it is tried. I bet we didn't get into it, but one of the things I really kind of prepared for and was happy to talk about was the idea to, maybe we'll do this next week, to tax unrealized gains on your investments. So, not even Hugo Chavez, I think, we thought that, hey, let's tax people on before they've even made the money. We'll call it unrealized gains and get money from them, collected from them then as well. Not even the great communist commissars of the 20th and 21st centuries ever thought of something as innovative as that. So you got to come to America, apparently, for your communist innovations.
Quick question for Kamala on her unrealized capital gains tax proposal. Do you think that is going to increase or decrease corporate investment? Just throwing that out there.
Yeah. Well, so I like doing these kind of policy-heavy episodes. This is really where kind of the rubber meets the road, and you kind of get out of just the reality TV show aspects of politics. And what I want is that this episode helped people kind of gather the intellectual ammunition that's required to push back against this stuff. Because like I said, and this is kind of the central takeaway from this, I think, this whole episode, is that when you hear some of these solutions on its face, just right in its face, it's like, oh, that sounds reasonable. That sounds like a good idea. You just have to dig one step deeper into it and realize that these solutions have unintended consequences. They have market disruptions tied into it. And those things, those consequences could have more harm to the economy and harm those specifically that you're trying to help than the actual benefits that are, supposed to be seen on the face of these solutions. So that's what I'm hoping that this episode did for you all. But that's going to do it for this episode. I want to thank everyone for tuning into this episode of the In the Tank podcast. Join us every week for a new episode. For those audio-only listeners that are probably catching the show on a Friday or later, leave a review for us on iTunes. That'd be greatly appreciated. And consider joining us live a day earlier on Thursdays at noon Central Time, where we are live streaming this on Facebook and YouTube and Rumble and X. You can join the conversation, throw your comments and questions in the chat. Maybe we'll show your comments on the screen. Maybe we'll address your questions on the fly. You can't support the show via super chats anymore because YouTube demonetized us, but you can still support the show financially by going to heartland.org/inthetank, donating directly to the show. It's a better way to do it. That way YouTube doesn't take a 30% cut. If you'd like, you can follow us on Twitter at InTheTankPod. And if you have any comments, questions, or suggestions for the show, feel free to email us at inthetankpodcast@gmail.com. Jim Lakely, where can the fine people find you?
You can find me on September 13th. That's a Friday at the Heartland Institute's 40th anniversary benefit dinner. So if you like this show and you'd like to meet me and like to meet Donnie and like to meet Andy, our producer, and Chris and Justin, then you can come to our annual benefit dinner in Chicago at the Hilton Chicago downtown. Go to heartland.org for tickets. And if you don't like us, I also have still got good news for you, because you might like Larry Arnn and you might like Nigel Farage, and those guys are going to be giving speeches at our event. And we also just added Dr. Jay Bhattacharya, the inventor of the Great Barrington Declaration, who did probably the most important work pushing back on nonsense, lockdowns and whatnot during the pandemic. So please, September 13th in Chicago. Go to heartland.org for more details.
Fantastic. Chris Talgo, what do you have to pitch today?
Well, I'm going to be on the golf course this weekend going for that second hole-in-one, Donnie. That's where you can find me.
Fantastic. Thank you, producer extraordinaire Andy in the background, and we will talk to you guys next week.
He's a lion, dog-faced pony soldier.